Some of the harshest voices we hear in our heads, I don't think they started there. See, we didn't invent them. I think we inherited them. See, they were passed down like hand-me-down clothes, for example. They were most likely threadbare, ill-fitting, full of someone else's history. But because we wore them for so long, we started thinking that they were ours. This is Uber Bintegers, where integrity is lived and intimacy is felt. But let's go there. See, this episode is about those voices in our heads that tell us things like, you're too much, or you're never enough, or why can't you just be normal? Or this devastating one that says, you're a disappointment, or don't be selfish, or no one's going to love you like that, or you're lucky anyone puts up with you. Have you heard, you always mess things up? Or stop crying, be strong, grow up, don't take up so much space, or you don't really matter. See, most of us, we didn't wake up one day with these thoughts. I think over time we absorb them through repetition, through tone, through what wasn't said, and through the look in someone else's eyes when we were simply being ourselves. And even now, I think long after those moments have passed, those voices are still playing like background music in our lives. And they show up when we're trying to rest, when we express a need that we have, when we say no, when we speak up, and even when we fall short, when we let our guard down, when we try to love ourselves, for example. They whisper things like, who do you even think you are, right? Or you should have known better. Or you're making this about you again. Or this is why people always leave. And here's the thing. We tend to believe these stories because they sound familiar, because they were attached to people that we trusted, because they were wired into us before we even had the tools to question them. But just because something is familiar does not mean it's true, though. Let that land. Just because something is familiar, it doesn't mean that it's true. Most of us weren't handed love. Most of us were handed expectations. We weren't handed affirmation. No, we were handed shame. We weren't handed any guidance. Instead, we were handed fear. And it came wrapped up in legacy, in culture, in faith, in parenting, in trauma. But just because it was handed down, it doesn't mean that we have to carry it forward. Let me just take a moment here. This isn't about blaming our families or our elders or our communities. This is about interrupting a lineage of harm. It's about choosing clarity over silence. It's about asking, is this voice actually mine, or is it something that I inherited? Because we cannot reclaim our worth until, while we're still living under the rule of voices that were never rooted in love. And let's be honest, some of these voices didn't even come from malice. They came from people who were scared, people who were unloved themselves, people who thought that shame was the same as accountability, or people who were taught to survive by shrinking and who wanted to keep us safe in the same way that they knew how. But their fear does not have to be our foundation. See, we are allowed to listen for what we believe. We're allowed to question the volume inside our head. We are allowed to rebuild again. And Here's what that could look like. It could look like starting by paying attention to the moment that we feel small, right? When our shoulders maybe hunch up, or when our gut seems to tighten up, when we feel that we've failed just by being real, or when we suddenly want to disappear, when we panic, for example, at the thought of being misunderstood. See, these moments are often triggered not by what's happening as much as by the voice that we assign to what's happening. And I think that voice, it usually belongs to someone from the past. It could be a parent, it could be a teacher, a caregiver, even a religious leader, an ex, a sibling, a culture, a whole system that we're in. Someone who has trained us directly or indirectly that being us and who we truly are comes with consequences. And so we internalize those voices. We turn their voice into our inner voice because it gave us a sense of control. Because if we could criticize ourselves first, maybe it would hurt less when others did so. And I think that's what we call internalized diminishment, right? It's this act of shrinking ourselves before someone else gets the chance to do so first. And we get so used to it that we don't even notice that we're doing it in the first place. But today we notice. Today we name the pattern. Today we begin to trace that voice. We ask, where did this voice come from? And more importantly, we ask, what is this voice costing me? Because these voices, they don't just sit in our heads in a quiet fashion. They shape how we show up in relationships, and they dictate how we speak to ourselves. And in essence, they inform what we tolerate. They filter how we receive love, and they distort how we dream. They fuel our self-doubt, they slow our healing, and they make us mistrust joy. They make us explain away the compliments. They make us self-sabotage good things. They make us settle for harmful options. And that's why we cannot keep calling them normal. We have to see them for what they are. And that is, they are inherited scripts that are no longer serving us. Let's name maybe a few common inherited voices and what they often sound like. Consider, for example, the performer voice, which says, don't disappoint them, or if you fail, you're nothing, or you're only as good as your last success. And then there's the pleaser voice that says, don't upset anyone, or you're responsible for everyone's emotions, or if they're mad, it's your fault. And then there's a critic voice that says you should have known better, or you're always messing things up. You'll never get this right. Have you heard the ghost voice? The ghost voice that says, stay small and maybe they'll stay. Or be quiet so you don't get abandoned. Or don't need too much because it's annoying. And then there's the moralizer voice that says, you're being selfish, or you need to do more to be good, or wanting makes you ungrateful. Listen, I don't think we chose these voices. These were voices that were absorbed over time. And here's what we can choose. We can choose to ask every single time, does this voice speak in love, or does this voice speak in fear? If it's fear, it doesn't get to be the narrator of your story anymore. If it's shame, it doesn't get to steer the ship anymore. If it's conditional, let's pause before following that voice. See, that doesn't mean that it goes away overnight. Voices that have been with us for years, They don't leave quietly, but the volume can be turned down. See, the influence can be weakened over time, and the power that these voices have can eventually be broken. I mean, here's one of the most powerful things I think that we can do. We can start speaking new voices out loud, even if we don't believe them yet. We can say things like, I'm allowed to exist without having to explain myself. Or, I don't have to be perfect to be worthy. Or, my worth is not on trial today. Or, that voice is not mine. It was handed to me and I'm now handing it back. Or even more so, I get to rewrite my script today. We say these things not because they feel true right away, but because repetition starts to create some new roots internally. And what was once unfamiliar becomes instinct. And what was once borrowed becomes reclaimed. And what was once inherited becomes transformed. See, this is how we can stop the cycle. This is how we can become ancestors of true and deep healing. Not just for us, but also for the people who are around us, for our children, for our friends, for our future partners, for the strangers who are watching us live and living in this free zone. Because here's what happens when we stop living under inherited diminishment. We become dangerous. We become dangerous to systems that rely on our silence. We become magnetic to people who are looking for true authenticity. And we become safe to those who never felt seen and who are longing for someone to show what and model what self-love could look like. We become whole, not because we were flawless, but because we're fully present. And isn't that what worth was always meant to feel like? Not just acceptance, not just success, but presence. Presence that says, I am here. I am whole. I'm not who they said I was. I'm not who fear told me to be. I'm not a collection of borrowed voices from my past. I get to be me, fully, unapologetically, wholly. And that is enough. Tomorrow, I want to talk a little bit about loneliness and how it confuses our value. And in that episode, we'll name what it feels like when disconnection starts to look like proof that we are broken. But that's for tomorrow. Today, maybe let's start the work of identifying and releasing what never belonged to us in the first place. See, we can honor where we came from and still choose something new. Because we are worthy of a life where the loudest voices in our head are kind. Let's make that our legacy, shall we? I'll see you in tomorrow's episode. Thanks for watching.